My name is Dylan Walker, and I've spent most of my life in the small rural town of Willow Creek, deep in the heart of Tennessee. There's a large park on the outskirts of town that's home to an old oak tree, massive and ancient. Locals have passed by it for generations, but no one dares linger near it after dark. The tree has a sinister reputation, one that's been whispered about since before I was born. They say something evil resides there. Some call it a spirit, others a demon. But around here, people just refer to it as the haunt. Stories of strange occurrences and unexplainable events around the tree have circulated for years. Disembodied whispers, the feeling of being watched, and most chilling of all, the appearance of a shadowy figure that seems to emerge from the roots when the moon is high. I never believed any of it. I thought the stories were just local folklore, meant to scare kids from wandering too far into the woods. But that changed one summer night when I found out the truth the hard way. It was a hot July evening, and my friends and I were looking for something to do. The town doesn't offer much for entertainment, so we decided to hang out at the park, like we often did when boredom struck. My best friend Evan had always been a bit of a thrill seeker, and he came up with the brilliant idea to go near the old oak tree. "Let's see if the stories are true," he said, his tone daring. "It's just an old tree. What's the worst that could happen?" There were 5 of us, Evan, me, and a few other buddies. We laughed nervously as we made our way to the edge of the park where the tree stood towering against the twilight sky, its branches spread wide, casting dark, spider-like shadows across the ground. The closer we got, the more uneasy I felt. I don't know if it was the thick, humid air or the silence that had suddenly fallen over the park, but something didn't feel right. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to be the one who chickened out. We reached the tree and stood in a small circle beneath its massive canopy. For a while, nothing happened. We joked and teased each other about being scared of an old tree, our voices sounding a little too loud in the eerie stillness. But then, as we began to relax, something changed. It started with a low hum, almost like a faint buzzing sound, coming from the direction of the tree's trunk. We stopped talking, and in that moment of silence, we all heard it. Soft, but unmistakable, a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind, and the whispering grew louder, like a voice just out of reach. It seemed to be coming from the tree itself, from the very bark and roots beneath us. Evan, always the bold one, took a few steps closer. "Hello," he called out, as if expecting someone to answer. We watched as he leaned toward the base of the tree, squinting into the growing darkness. Then we saw it. A shadow, darker than the night around it, rising up from the roots. It had no form, no clear shape, but it moved, creeping upwards as if drawn by Evan's voice. The rest of us stood frozen, unable to process what we were seeing. Evan turned around, a confused look on his face, and that's when it happened. The shadow lunged. Evan screamed as something grabbed him, pulling him toward the tree. His arms flailed as he tried to break free, but whatever it was too strong. In the chaos, I could see the look of terror in his eyes, a raw panic I had never seen before. We ran. We didn't stop to help him, didn't try to fight whatever had him. We just ran as fast as we could, the screams echoing in our ears as we bolted through the park, not daring to look back. When we finally reached safety, gasping for breath, we realized Evan wasn't with us. We stood in silence, too afraid to go back. After what felt like hours, we called the police. A search was organized, but they found nothing. No trace of Evan, no evidence that he had ever been at the park. The town was shaken by his disappearance, but life moved on, as it always does. The park was declared off-limits at night, and the rumors about the tree only grew. Some say Evan still lingers there, another victim of the old oak's curse. Others believe that whatever took him was something far worse, something ancient and malevolent. As for me, I've never set foot in that park again. Sometimes late at night, I'll hear the faint sound of whispering when the wind blows, and I wonder if it's the same voice we heard that night. But I'll never know for sure, because I'm never going back to find out. The old oak tree still stands there today, casting its long shadows over Willow Creek. And while most people in town would rather forget what happened, there's a part of me that knows the truth. Something is waiting beneath those roots, something dark and hungry, and it's only a matter of time before it claims someone else. My name is Jason Miller, and I want to share a chilling story about an experience my uncle had in a small town in Louisiana near the bayou. It was a warm summer evening when my uncle decided to take a stroll through the local park, known for its ancient oak trees and sprawling green spaces. One tree in particular stood out, a massive, gnarled oak that locals believed was haunted. Stories circulated about a ghost who lingered there, known as the Spirit of the Oak, said to be the restless soul of a young woman who had met a tragic end many years ago. As my uncle walked closer to the tree, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The air around him grew still, and an eerie silence enveloped the area. Curious about the legends, he approached the tree to take a closer look. Its twisted branches loomed overhead, creating a canopy that blocked out the fading light. Suddenly, he noticed something unusual, a faint shimmering light emanating from the base of the tree. Intrigued, he leaned in closer. That's when he saw her, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair cascading like dark waves over her shoulders. She seemed to be kneeling beside the tree, lost in thought, her expression melancholic. "Excuse me, are you all right?" my uncle called out, his voice shaking slightly. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with sorrow, and slowly extended her hand toward him. In that moment, my uncle felt an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over him. The air around him grew colder, and he could hear faint whispers as if the wind carried the echoes of lost voices. Compelled by a force he couldn't explain, he took a step closer. "Who are you?" he asked gently, hoping to understand her plight. The woman's lips moved, but no sound escaped. Instead, she pointed to the tree, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Suddenly, the ground beneath my uncle's feet shifted, and he stumbled back. When he looked up again, the woman had vanished, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves behind. My uncle stood there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. Determined to uncover the truth, he returned the next day, armed with a notebook to jot down everything he could find. After speaking with some locals, he learned that the tree was indeed tied to a tragic story. Decades ago, a young woman had been in love with a local man. On the night they were supposed to elope, a terrible storm hit, and she was tragically struck by lightning while trying to reach him. With each story he heard, my uncle felt the weight of the woman's sorrow deepening. He realized that she was trapped between worlds, yearning for closure and peace. That evening, he returned to the oak tree, this time with a bouquet of wildflowers and a small candle. Kneeling at the base of the tree, he lit the candle and whispered a few words of remembrance, offering his respects to the lost soul. He placed the flowers gently at the foot of the tree, hoping to bring her some comfort. As he stood there, he felt a gentle breeze brush against him, as if the very air was thanking him for acknowledging her pain. The whispers he had heard before grew faint, replaced by a profound sense of calm. From that day on, my uncle visited the tree regularly, sharing stories with friends and family about the spirit he had encountered. He learned to respect the stories of the past and the power they held in shaping the present. Years later, as he recounted the tale to me, he said he felt that by honoring the woman's memory, he had helped her find peace. The ancient oak, once feared, became a symbol of love lost and the enduring connection between the living and the departed. My name is Daniel Rivers, and I want to share a haunting tale that my grandmother often told me about an experience she had at an old chapel in a small town in West Virginia. Years ago, when she was a young woman, she and her friends decided to explore an abandoned chapel that was said to be haunted. It was a place steeped in local lore, known for the ghost of a bride who was tragically jilted on her wedding day. According to the legend, she had wandered the grounds, forever searching for her lost love, dressed in her white wedding gown. One warm summer evening, fueled by curiosity and a sense of adventure, my grandmother and her friends drove to the chapel. As they approached the crumbling structure, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the overgrown path that led to the entrance. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, but their excitement outweighed their fear. Inside, the chapel was eerie and beautiful, with stained glass windows casting ghostly colors across the dust-covered floor. My grandmother and her friends decided to split up to explore the different rooms, but they agreed to meet back in the main hall after a short while. As she wandered through the dimly lit corridors, my grandmother felt a chill run down her spine. The air grew colder, and she could hear whispers echoing off the walls. Just as she was about to turn back, she caught a glimpse of something white moving at the far end of the hallway. Curiosity piqued. She followed it, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. When she turned the corner, she was met with a breathtaking sight. There, standing in the fading light, was a figure in a beautiful white gown. The bride's hair flowed down her back, and her face was partially obscured by a veil. My grandmother froze, unable to take her eyes off the ethereal figure. The bride seemed to be gazing out of a window, lost in thought. "Hello?" my grandmother called out, her voice trembling slightly. The figure turned slowly, revealing a sorrowful expression. My grandmother felt a wave of sadness wash over her as the bride raised a hand, gesturing for her to come closer. Compelled by an unseen force, my grandmother took a step forward, but as she did, the bride began to fade into the air as if she were nothing more than mist. In that moment, my grandmother felt an overwhelming sense of loss and longing. She realized that the bride was trapped between worlds, eternally searching for her lost love. Heartbroken, my grandmother called out, "I'm here. What do you need?" The bride paused for a moment, looking back over her shoulder. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and my grandmother felt a deep connection, as if the bride was pleading for help to find peace. But just as quickly as she had appeared, the bride was gone, leaving only a lingering sense of sorrow in the air. Shaken, my grandmother returned to the main hall where her friends were waiting. They could see the change in her demeanor and urged her to share what had happened. As she recounted her encounter, her friends listened intently, their expressions a mix of fear and fascination. That night, they decided to leave the chapel, but my grandmother couldn't shake the feeling that she had to do something for the bride. She suggested they gather flowers from the nearby woods and place them by the chapel's entrance as a tribute to the lost soul. The following day, they returned with a bouquet of wildflowers and laid them gently at the chapel's threshold. My grandmother whispered a promise to the bride that she would remember her story and share it with others. From that day forward, the tale of the bride in white became a cherished memory, passed down through generations. My grandmother often spoke of that night, sharing how the encounter had left a profound mark on her soul. She believed that by acknowledging the bride's pain, they had helped ease her restless spirit, if only just a little. Though the chapel eventually crumbled away, the legend of the bride in white lived on, reminding everyone that love, even when lost, can resonate through time. And sometimes a simple act of kindness can help guide a lost soul home. My name is Sarah Bennett, and I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. For as long as I can remember, there's been a local legend about a grand old mansion that sits on top of a hill, looming over the town. The mansion, known as Hilltop Manor, has been abandoned for decades, yet it's the source of countless stories about ghosts and strange happenings. Everyone in town knows about Hilltop, but no one dares to go near it. Some say it's cursed. Others believe it's haunted by the restless spirits of those who once lived there. I never paid much attention to the rumors, at least not until last fall. It was late October, just a few days before Halloween, when my friends and I decided to explore the mansion. We were college seniors, home for a long weekend, and we wanted a thrill. My best friend, Emily, was always up for an adventure, and she suggested we go check out the place after dark. "There's nothing to be afraid of," she said, grinning. "It's just an old house." There were 4 of us. Emily, me, and our friends Josh and Taylor. We were curious but skeptical. Hilltop Manor had been boarded up for years, and we didn't expect to find much besides dust and cobwebs. But as we made our way up the winding path to the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The house was massive, with tall windows that seemed to stare down at us like eyes. The overgrown garden and rusted iron gate gave the place an eerie, forgotten look. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left it open, inviting us in. We hesitated for a moment, standing on the cracked steps, but Emily pushed forward. "Come on," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Let's see what's inside." The inside of the mansion was just as creepy as the outside. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked beneath our feet. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and broken furniture lay scattered in the rooms. But what struck me most was the silence. It was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. We wandered through the house, laughing nervously and making jokes to calm our nerves. But the deeper we went, the stranger things became. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I wasn't the only one. "Do you feel that?" Josh asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, we heard it, a faint sound coming from upstairs. It was like the distant echo of footsteps, slow and deliberate. We froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. "Someone's here, Emily." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer, but we couldn't see anyone. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced up the grand staircase, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. But the hallway above was empty. "Let's get out of here," Taylor said, his voice trembling. But Emily, always the fearless one, shook her head. "No way. We came here to explore, and I'm not leaving just because of some creepy noises." She started up the stairs before any of us could stop her. Reluctantly, we followed, the old wooden steps groaning beneath our weight. When we reached the second floor, we were greeted by a long, narrow hallway lined with closed doors. The air felt colder here, and a strange smell lingered, like mildew and something rotten. We opened the first door on the left. It led into what must have once been a bedroom, but it was in complete disrepair. The windows were cracked, and the bed was nothing more than a pile of decaying wood and fabric. As we stepped inside, I noticed something odd, a mirror hanging on the wall. It was the only thing in the room that seemed untouched by time. The glass was spotless, and the frame gleamed as if it had been polished recently. I stared at my reflection, feeling uneasy, when suddenly the mirror fogged over, as though someone had breathed on it. And then words began to appear, slowly forming in the mist. "Get out!" We all saw it, clear as day. The words hung there in the mirror, and for a moment none of us moved. My throat tightened as panic surged through me. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. But just as we turned to go, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. Emily screamed, and we rushed to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone was holding it closed. Josh and Taylor pounded on the door, shouting for help, but there was no one to hear us. The footsteps started again, this time louder, echoing through the house. They were coming up the stairs, growing faster, more frantic, as if whoever or whatever was coming didn't want us to leave. The temperature plummeted, and the room grew darker, the shadows stretching across the walls. I could feel something, an overwhelming presence closing in on us. My breath came in short gasps, and my hands were trembling as I pounded on the door, desperate to escape. Just when I thought we were done for, the door flew open. We bolted out of the room, racing down the stairs without looking back. I could hear the footsteps behind us, chasing us, but I didn't dare turn around. We ran out of the house and down the hill, not stopping until we were back at the bottom of the path, gasping for breath. None of us spoke for a long time. We just stood there, staring up at the mansion, trying to make sense of what had happened. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "We shouldn't have gone in there," she whispered. We never spoke of that night again, at least not to anyone else. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about the words in the mirror, the footsteps, the door slamming shut. And I wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't gotten out when we did? Hilltop Manor still stands on that hill, its windows dark and empty, watching over the town. But now, whenever I pass by, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me back. Something that doesn't want to be disturbed. My name is Jake Anderson, and I want to share a chilling tale my grandfather recounted to me about an experience he had while traveling through the back roads of rural Kentucky many years ago. It was a hot summer afternoon in the late 1960s when my grandfather, a young man at the time, decided to take a road trip across the countryside. He loved exploring the quiet towns and picturesque landscapes, often seeking out little-known spots that offered a glimpse into the past. On this particular day, He had planned to visit a small historical site rumored to be haunted. After driving for a few hours, he found himself on a narrow, winding road lined with towering trees and overgrown brush. The air was thick with the scent of summer, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. He was enjoying the peacefulness of the drive when, out of nowhere, a dense fog rolled in, obscuring his vision and making the atmosphere feel heavy and foreboding. As he continued driving, he felt an odd sensation that something was watching him. He brushed it off as his imagination playing tricks on him, but the feeling persisted. Suddenly, he noticed a flicker of movement in the fog ahead. Curious, he slowed down to get a better look. Emerging from the fog was a figure, a tall, thin creature with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. My grandfather's heart raced as he realized he was staring at something he couldn't quite comprehend. It had a ghostly, almost ethereal quality, as if it were partly transparent. The creature seemed to glide just above the ground, moving with an eerie grace that sent shivers down his spine. Frozen in place, my grandfather watched as the creature approached his car, its eyes locked onto his. It had a hauntingly sad expression, as if it were trapped between worlds. In that moment, he felt a wave of empathy wash over him, despite the terror of the situation. He recalled hearing stories about spirits that wandered the earth, searching for something lost, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was one of those souls. The creature reached out a hand, its fingers elongated and skeletal, and he felt an overwhelming urge to roll down the window and communicate with it. Gathering his courage, he finally managed to speak. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. To his surprise, the creature's expression softened, and it gestured toward the nearby woods. My grandfather felt an inexplicable connection, as if the creature was asking for help. He took a deep breath, trying to quell the fear rising within him. "I'll help you," he said, even though he had no idea what he could do. The creature nodded slowly, and without warning, it turned and began to float away into the misty forest. My grandfather instinctively followed, his curiosity overpowering his fear. He parked the car on the side of the road and stepped out, the fog swirling around him like a living entity. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew colder, and the light from the sun seemed to fade into a dim twilight. The creature led him to a clearing where the fog lifted just enough for him to see a weathered old tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted. It looked ancient, and my grandfather could sense a heavy energy surrounding it. He felt as if he were on sacred ground. Suddenly, the creature stopped and pointed to the base of the tree. My grandfather knelt down and began to dig through the leaves and dirt. To his astonishment, he uncovered an old locket, tarnished and buried beneath the roots. As he held it up, the creature's eyes glowed brighter, a look of gratitude washing over its spectral face. Realizing this locket must have been important to the creature in life, my grandfather felt a surge of determination. He promised to return it to a place where it would be cherished. He placed the locket in his pocket, and when he looked up again, the creature was gone. The fog began to dissipate, and the sun broke through the trees, casting a warm glow over the clearing. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, as if he had fulfilled a purpose. After that day, my grandfather never forgot his encounter. He often returned to that spot, leaving flowers and other trinkets as a tribute to the ghostly creature that had shared its sorrow with him. He believed that by acknowledging its presence and honoring its memory, he had helped a lost soul find some semblance of peace. Years later, he would tell this story to my family and me, reminding us that there are mysteries in the world we may never fully understand, but kindness and compassion can bridge the gap between the living and the lost. My name is Ethan Carter, and I've lived in Colton, a small town in the Midwest, for most of my life. The town itself is quiet, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. But there's one spot that locals avoid, the abandoned train depot on the outskirts of town. It used to be the hub of activity in the 1920s, but after the railway shut down, it was left to rot. Now it's just a crumbling old building, barely standing against the elements. I first heard the stories about the depot when I was a kid. They say it's haunted by the ghost of a station master who died in a freak accident back in the day. People who wander too close claim to hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps, even the sound of a train that never arrives. Some say they've seen a figure in an old-fashioned uniform walking the platform, only to vanish into thin air. I never believed any of it, of course. I thought it was just an old wives' tale, something to keep kids from exploring a dangerous abandoned building. But that all changed one summer night when I experienced the terror firsthand. It was a warm evening, and a few friends and I were hanging out at the local diner. We'd heard the ghost stories a million times, but something about that night made us curious. One of my friends, Jake, dared us to check out the depot. We were bored, so we agreed. It was just a stupid challenge. What could go wrong? We arrived at the depot just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The place looked even creepier in the fading light. The roof was sagging and the windows were boarded up. Vines crawled up the sides of the building, as if nature itself was trying to swallow it whole. "Still want to do this?" Jake asked, flashing a nervous grin. No one wanted to back out, so we crept inside. The interior was even worse than I expected. Old wooden benches were covered in dust, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards under our feet. We split up, each of us exploring a different part of the depot. I found myself wandering down a narrow hallway that led to what looked like the station master's office. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, a cold breeze hit me, sending a shiver down my spine. The office was small and cluttered with old papers and ledgers scattered across a desk. A faded calendar hung on the wall, stuck in the year 1932. Just as I was about to leave, I heard something, a faint tapping sound. It was rhythmic, like someone tapping their fingers on the desk. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to listen, but the tapping stopped. I mustered the courage to call out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving across the far wall, like someone standing just outside the door. I whipped around, but no one was there. My mind raced. Was it my friends playing a trick on me? I quickly exited the office, only to find the hallway empty. I rushed back to the main waiting area, where I found Jake and the others. They hadn't seen or heard anything, but the uneasy look in their eyes told me they were just as freaked out as I was. We decided to leave before things got any weirder. As we made our way out, something happened that I'll never forget. We were about to step through the exit when we heard it, a distant whistle, like a train approaching. But there were no tracks, no train, just an eerie echoing whistle that sent chills through us. We froze, glancing at each other in disbelief. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the faint rumble of wheels on rails. Panic set in, and we bolted out of the depot, running as fast as we could. That night, none of us spoke about what we'd heard. We just silently agreed to never go back to that place. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something back with me. Strange things started happening at home, objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing by themselves, and every night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I'd hear that same tapping sound, faint but unmistakable. I haven't been back to the depot since, and I don't plan to, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear the distant whistle of a phantom train calling me back. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe that old station master never really left, forever waiting for a train that will never come. My name is Sarah Thompson, and I work at a small bank in a quiet town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and gossip travels faster than the wind. One afternoon, while working the counter, I encountered something that still sends chills down my spine. It was just after lunch, and the bank was unusually quiet. Most of the customers had come in early to handle their transactions and grab lunch from the nearby cafe. I was organizing some paperwork when I noticed a woman walking toward the bathroom in the back of the bank. She had long, dark hair and wore a long gray coat that seemed a bit out of place for the season. I figured she was just another customer, but something about her felt off. After a few minutes, I noticed she hadn't returned. I shrugged it off at first, but as time passed, I felt a sense of unease creeping in. It wasn't like her to take so long. I decided to check on her, thinking she might need assistance. When I reached the bathroom door, I knocked lightly. "Ma'am, are you all right in there?" I called out, but there was no response. My instincts kicked in, and I turned the doorknob. To my surprise, it swung open easily. I stepped inside, but the bathroom was empty. The air felt heavy, and a chill ran down my spine. I glanced around, thinking she must have left through another exit, but that didn't explain why the room felt so eerie. As I was about to leave, I noticed something lying on the floor, a small leather passbook. I picked it up, thinking it might belong to the woman. It was worn and old, with yellowed pages and faded writing. Flipping through it, I saw entries dating back many years, mostly transactions of small amounts. The last entry caught my attention. It was dated just a few days prior and mentioned a large withdrawal. Curiosity piqued, I tucked the passbook under my arm and went back to my desk. I was determined to find out who it belonged to. After a few minutes of searching the bank's records, I found the name written in the passbook. Margaret Hill. Margaret was a name I recognized. She had been a longtime customer, a sweet old lady who always came in with a warm smile. But the last transaction in the passbook didn't match her usual patterns. I felt a sense of concern wash over me. Suddenly, the bank door swung open and a gust of wind blew in, making the lights flicker momentarily. I looked up to see an elderly woman standing in the doorway, looking frail but determined. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Margaret?" I called out, holding up the passbook. The woman's expression changed, a mix of recognition and fear crossing her face. "Where did you find that?" she asked, stepping closer. I explained how I discovered the passbook in the bathroom and asked if she was all right. Her gaze darted nervously around the bank as if she were searching for something. I thought I lost it," she stammered. "It's very important to me." I handed it to her, but she hesitated before taking it. "Can I ask what happened? You seem to take a long time in the bathroom," I probed gently. Margaret glanced over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw her, the woman in the bathroom." My heart raced. "What do you mean? What woman?" "She's been following me for weeks now," Margaret replied, her voice trembling. "Every time I go to the bank, I feel her presence. In the bathroom, I saw her reflection in the mirror. She was staring right at me." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination?" Margaret shook her head vigorously. "No, it's real. She wants something from me, something that belongs to her." I tried to calm her down, but I could feel the tension in the air. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and I thought I saw a shadow dart past the entrance of the bank. "Margaret, you need to leave. Maybe take a break from coming here for a while," I suggested, hoping to ease her fear. But she just looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and sadness. "I can't," she whispered. "I have to settle my account. It's all I have left." Before I could say anything else, she turned and rushed out of the bank, clutching the passbook tightly to her chest. I watched her go, a feeling of dread settling in my stomach. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease as I finished my shift. When I finally left the bank, I glanced back at the building, half expecting to see Margaret again. But the only thing that greeted me was the silence of the night. Weeks passed, and I didn't see Margaret again. I learned from my coworkers that she hadn't come in since that day. It wasn't until one fateful evening that I discovered why. The news spread quickly throughout the town, a tragic story of an elderly woman who had passed away alone in her home. When I heard the news, my heart sank. I remembered the fear in her eyes, the urgency in her voice. It all made sense now. But there was something else that nagged at me. The very next day, while cleaning up the back office, I found the passbook lying on my desk. It hadn't been there before. With trembling hands, I opened it to the last entry. It was different now. The numbers had changed, and beside the last transaction, I noticed a new date, the day Margaret passed away. I felt a chill sweep over me, and as I stared at the page, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret's presence lingered, still searching for something that belonged to her, even in death. To this day, I can't explain what happened that afternoon in the bank, but I learned that sometimes the past doesn't let go so easily, and some spirits refuse to be forgotten. My name is Daniel Morgan, and I grew up in a small town in Tennessee, not far from the Mississippi River. There was always something mysterious about the old graveyard near the riverbanks, a place known as Haven Hill Cemetery. Most of the locals kept their distance from it, especially after sunset. Strange occurrences had been whispered about for decades, from eerie lights floating through the trees to soft whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Haven Hill wasn't just any graveyard. It was old, dating back to the Civil War. Many of the graves were overgrown with vines and moss, their headstones worn smooth by time. Some claimed that the restless spirits of soldiers and townsfolk haunted the place, seeking peace they never found in life. As a kid, I heard the stories, but I never believed them, at least not until the night my friends and I ventured there. It was a chilly evening in late November. My friends James, Mark, and I were hanging out at Mark's place when the conversation turned to local legends. We had heard the stories about Haven Hill all our lives, but none of us had ever gone to check it out. Mark, always the adventurous one, suggested we go and see for ourselves if the place was as haunted as everyone said. At first, I wasn't sure. There was something about that cemetery that gave me the creeps, even though I didn't believe in ghosts. But James was eager to go, and before I knew it, we were heading toward Haven Hill, flashlights in hand. We reached the cemetery just as the last light of day was fading. The entrance was marked by an old, wrought iron gate, half covered in rust. Beyond it, the headstones stretched out in neat rows, disappearing into the darkness under the looming trees. A thick fog had begun to roll in from the river, making the place look even more eerie. We stepped through the gate, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath our feet and the distant call of an owl. For a while, it was just like any other cemetery, silent, still, and a little unsettling. But as we wandered deeper into the graveyard, things started to change. It began with a whisper. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint voice, too soft to make out the words, carried on the wind. I stopped in my tracks, shining my flashlight around, but there was no one there. Just rows of headstones and the twisting branches of the trees above. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, I heard it." Mark, always the skeptic, shrugged it off. "It's just the wind," he said, though he didn't sound as confident as usual. We kept walking, but the whispers grew louder. It was as if dozens of voices were murmuring just out of earshot, their words indistinct but filled with a sense of urgency. My heart began to race, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow moving among the graves. It was quick, barely visible, but I knew it wasn't a trick of the light. I wasn't the only one who saw it either. "Did you see that?" James asked, his voice shaking. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. "Yeah, something's out there." We kept moving, our flashlights flickering as we went. The air grew colder, and the fog thickened, swirling around us like it was alive. The whispers continued, growing louder with every step. They weren't just voices anymore. They sounded like they were speaking directly to us, urging us to leave. Suddenly, Mark stopped. "We need to get out of here," he said, his bravado gone. We turned to head back toward the entrance, but that's when we heard it, a soft, rustling sound behind us, like footsteps. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing there, just shadows and fog. Then out of the darkness, a figure appeared. It was a man, or at least it looked like one at first. He was tall and thin, his clothes tattered and dirty. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes... There was something wrong with his eyes. They were dark, hollow, as if they had seen things no living person should ever see. He didn't move, just stood there, watching us. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they were trying to warn us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel my legs trembling. "Who are you?" Mark called out, his voice wavering. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it slowly raised its hand, pointing toward the river. I didn't want to look, but something compelled me to turn. In the distance, through the fog, I could see the faint glow of lanterns, bobbing up and down as if carried by invisible hands. My blood ran cold. Those lights weren't there before. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. Without a word, we turned and ran, sprinting back toward the entrance as fast as we could. The whispers followed us, growing louder, more insistent. I could hear footsteps behind us, closing in, but I didn't dare look back. By the time we reached the gate, I was gasping for breath. We didn't stop running until we were back on the main road, far from the cemetery. Only then did we slow down, our hearts pounding in our chests. For a long time, none of us spoke. Finally, James broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. All I knew was that someone, was in that graveyard, and whatever it was, it didn't want us there. I haven't been back to Haven Hill Cemetery since that night, and I don't plan to. But sometimes when I drive past it, I can't help but glance toward the hill where the graves lie hidden beneath the trees. And every now and then, in the distance, I swear I see those lanterns glowing in the fog, just like they did that night. I don't know what we encountered in that cemetery, whether it was a ghost, a spirit, or something else entirely. But I do know this. Haven Hill isn't just a place for the dead to rest. It's a place where something still lingers, something that watches and waits in the shadows. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.